33 years and 33 minutes. Together. 700 years before he was born, the prophet said, his name shall be called Wonderful. Isaiah 9:6. He was so wonderful that angels sang at his birth. He was so wonderful that the sun refused to shine when he died. He was so wonderful that his executioner said, surely this was a righteous man. He was so wonderful that his name is the best known appellation in history. More people know of Jesus tonight than know of any other historical character. More books have been written about him, more songs composed in his honor, and there are millions of people that would lay down their lives, if required, for him this hour. The greatest life was a short life. 33 years. When I was 20, I thought 30 was pretty old. When I got to 30, I thought it's not so bad. And now I think 30-year-olds are just kids, you know. Jesus was cut off in the middle of his life. You know, most of us live to be twice that old or more. But Jesus didn't need as long a life to accomplish what God wanted him to do than what he used. He just needed those 33 years. We're going to use Mark as our text tonight. And the approach we're going to take is to look at one verse from every chapter. So let's just dive in. There are 16 chapters. We're actually going to notice 24 verses because we'll look at a couple of verses sometimes. But Mark is the shortest of the accounts of Jesus' life. Only 16 chapters, 678 verses, 14,949 words. That's the shortest by far of the gospel accounts. But he covers Jesus' life in a very engaging style. Someone said that Mark is like a little child telling a story he's excited about. He did this, and then he went here, and he did this, and then he did this, and it was wonderful, and it was amazing. And that's the impression you get when you read from the book of Mark. He uses the word that's translated straightway, a time or two, anon, 38 times in only 16 chapters. So Jesus is straightway, he's moving from place to place. It's like snapshots of Jesus' life, like you're going through a picture album and you're seeing, oh, well, there's where he was baptized, and oh, there's where he healed the sick, and oh, there's where he walked on water, and oh, there's where he died. That's the book of Mark. So let's go. Mark 1 can't take too long in any chapter when you have a short amount of time. So let's go to Mark 1 and start at verse 9. Mark does not begin where Luke and Matthew do with the birth of Jesus. He begins with the baptism. Because in Mark, the emphasis is on Jesus as a servant. Matthew, he's a king. In Luke, he is the Son of Man. And John, he's the Son of God. But in Mark, he's the servant of man. And we're going to emphasize that when we get to chapter 10. But you don't know the pedigree of a servant. That doesn't matter. You know, a king, yeah, you have to know who he's descended from, but not a servant. And so Mark does not emphasize that. He picks it up when Jesus is 30 years old. He doesn't give us his age, but Luke does in Luke 3:23. Jesus, being about 30 years old, was baptized. And that was the age when Levites began to serve in the Old Testament. Numbers 13, 4, and 47. I think you could double check me on that. But that was a milestone number in Jewish culture, 30 years. And that's where Jesus, most of his life, he was just a common man. 30 years. He was a carpenter down the street, built houses, fixed furniture. Maybe he made plows. I don't know. That word tecton can mean a lot of things. But Jesus was just a carpenter. He was a man with calloused hands and a sunburned face because he was a worker. And people didn't know who their neighbor was. The one who was their neighbor. And the one who made their house might have been the one, or the one that the world might have been the one that made their house. You know? So and he's gone from Nazareth, which is in the north, 70 miles down to where John the Baptist is baptizing in the river Jordan in Enon near to Salem. outside in a river, and a lot of people are being baptized by John. And this is the context. Verse 9, it came to pass in those days that Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee. Galilee's in the north, Judea is in the south. Two sections. There's also Samaria between them and Perea on the east side of Jordan River. So 4 main sections of the land of the Jews. And he traveled south and was baptized of John. That's John the Immerser, John the Baptizer in Jordan. The American Standard Version there has into Jordan, which is significant because it means he was lowered under the water. They didn't go get some water and sprinkle it on him. They took him into the water and put him under it. He was baptized in Jordan. Now, this is the only baptism in the New Testament, as far as I can tell, water baptism in the New Testament, as far as I can tell, that was not for the remission of sins. Now, John baptized for the remission of sins. Look at verse 4 in the same context. He baptized for remission of sins. So it wasn't that John didn't baptize for remission of sins. It was that Jesus had no sins that needed to be remitted. So if I resist baptism when I have sins, Jesus could say, look, I submitted to it and I didn't even need it. I did not need my sins to be forgiven. Now, Jesus needed to do it, as he tells John in Matthew's accounts, a little more expanded, Matthew 3, 13, 17. He says, suffer to be so now to fulfill all righteousness. So what that means is there was a command to be baptized, and all God's commands are righteous. And if Jesus didn't check that box, he would not have fulfilled that part of God's righteousness. So he was immersed to set the example for us and also to obey that command, even though he was innocent of sin. Now, straightway coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens open, the Spirit like a dove descending upon him. There came a voice from heaven saying, and Jesus is 30 years old. And this is where God signs the birth certificate. His father signs the birth certificate. Not in his bar mitzvah when he was 12, in Luke 2, but when he was 30 years old at his baptism, God says, this is my beloved Son, of whom I am well pleased. So that's my son. My son. Not Joseph, that's my son. Now, if we had time to speak more on baptism or on Jesus' baptism, we would make these points. Number one, Jesus demonstrated his importance. He submitted to it. He also walked 70 miles. But I'd be willing to walk about 7 steps to be baptized. So 70 steps. He walked 70 miles to be baptized. Number two, he overcame the objection of others. John said, you don't need to be baptized with anything. You baptize me. Jesus said no. There are very few people that are ever immersed in water and give us their sins and don't do it over the objection of somebody. Sometimes it's mom or dad. Sometimes it's a brother or sister. Sometimes it's a child. A lot of times it's a friend. Maybe co-workers. But we have to say, I'm going to please God rather than men. Let men think what they will, but I'm going to please my Father. He wants me to do it. I know he does. I'm going to do it. That's what Jesus. Let's go to chapter 2. Now we were in verse 9 in chapter 1. Let's go to verse 10 in chapter 2. Mark is moving fast. In Mark 2:10, this is in the context where you have a man who was crippled. And he had 4 friends, and his friends are determined that Jesus is going to heal their friend. And Jesus is preaching. He's so popular, he's filled up the house where he is, they can't get in. There's no room at the door, they can't. And one of them thinks, well, maybe we can go up on the roof. So he goes up on the roof, and they tear a hole in the roof, and they let the man down. And I always think there's dust coming down, and boys, and everybody said, what's that? And here comes this blanket, and this bed, and there's a guy on it. Can I have you? And then Jesus comes in and stares at the 4 friends. There. Now, then Jesus, this is what's curious about this, is what Jesus says. He doesn't say, I'll heal you, or arise them all. He says, this is in verse 5, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. Well, they didn't come for forgiveness of sins. They came for healing the body. But Jesus, knowing all things, knew what this man's real problem was not a good walk. It wasn't he couldn't go to heaven. He had sins. That was a much bigger problem. So Jesus says, "Thy sins be forgiven." And then those Pharisees, they did not come to learn; they came to criticize, to try to catch him in his words. They were accused of blasphemy. Well, who does he think he is? Who does he think he is? Say that man's sins are forgiven. Nobody but God can forgive sins. Right? That's exactly right. So guess what? He's the Son of God. He can forgive sins. Now, that brings us to our key verse here, which is verse 10. But you may know that the Son of Man has power. The word power here, authority, is one of Mark's key words. We'll see it again if we go over chapter 10 or so. But here it starts with power. That you might know that the Son of Man, that's Jesus, has power or authority on earth to forgive sins. Let me demonstrate it to you so you can't deny it. He says in the single problem. So he's addressing the audience, and then he turns his attention to the man of life. I say to thee, arise, and take up thy bed, and go thy way to thine house. You won't need to have your friends to carry your own. You carry your own one. The man gets up, immediately rose, took up his bed, and went forth before them all, insomuch as they were all amazed. Another one of Mark's key words, amazed. And glorify God, said we never saw it in this fashion. Now, the reason we read that is so that we immediately know that Jesus has authority on earth to forgive sins. That's why he came to the earth, was to forgive sins. We're going to see him demonstrating that. But more importantly, keep that in mind for today. Because that's my biggest problem, too. That's your biggest problem. That's your friend's biggest problem. Everybody's biggest problem is sin. And all of us can come short of the glory of God. You might have financial problems. You might have health problems. You might have relationship problems. You might have 100 problems. But your main problem is you've got to get rid of your sins. If you don't get rid of your sins, you're going to have an eternal problem. Because that's the one thing you've got to take care of before you die is to be forgiven sins. Now, the other things will all be fixed in heaven. But that one, we won't get to heaven because we fix it. That's what Jesus is going to show us as we go through the book. Now, let's go to chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 39. No, there isn't 39. 14. That's 14. And he ordained 12 that they should be with him, that he might send them to preach. If you mark your Bible, you mark the three things that he ordained them to do, or conditioned the apostles to do. One is to preach. That's in verse 14. 2 is to heal sickness. 3 is to cast out devils. So 3 things the apostles were commissioned and empowered to do. Now, we mentioned this morning that 3 things that are on people's minds as they leave this world. Well, there are 3 things that Jesus came into the world to do, and they're similar. Jesus came to save souls. You analyze his days. His personal ministry lasts about 1,200 days. We have a record of somewhere between 52 and 60 of those 1,200 days. What events that happened on those days. You look at those days, 89 chapters, like Mark, Luke, and John. You say, well, what did Jesus do? How did he use his life? 3 things. 1, saving souls. He's going place to place and has soul conversations wherever he goes. 2, training disciples. That's why I bring it up here. He put himself in 12 men, so that when he went back to heaven, they could do his work. And he's starting a school here. This is what this is. And they don't have a school with brick and mortar. They have their schools where follow me around and watch me. And that's what these 12 men did. They watched him heal the sick. They watched him deal with his enemies. They watched him preach and listen to him preach sermons and observe his character, so that when he was gone, they could live like he lived. And that's the whole point that we're supposed to do like that too. For Spirit 2:21-22, we walk in his, he left us an example which follow steps. We did no sin into his mouth. So we want to follow his steps as they did it. They were personally trained. They also are our eyes and ears and minds to ascertain whether the question, is this man the Son of God, was true or not? You never met him. I never met him. I didn't hear his stories. But can I believe in it? Oh, yeah. Because I read the message of those who knew it. Matthew, the first book of the New Testament. John, the last of the four Gospels. Plus the books of John and the books of Peter. Those were men who were in this group that were just one. They watched it and they wrote about it. Now, if they were of average or at least average intelligence, if they were men of integrity, and if they had access to the facts, then they could be trusted. And those three things could be shown. Now, let's move on. Let's see in chapter 4. Chapter 4, our verse is 39. I have this one, 39. This is when Jesus is in a ship with his disciples, and there's a storm comes up. He's asleep. It's the only time in the New Testament, this account, this event, where Jesus was asleep. That's what I don't know. But he was asleep. They wake him up. There's a storm. He stands and peace be still. 3 words. And the wind would fall. And the rain would fall. And I suppose the boat stopped off. Maybe if they looked over the side, they could have seen their own mirror image of the calmness of water. You don't know Jesus breathing in that water. And there's a man that has power. Calmness. That shows us his authority. And he's demonstrating authority in this book on disease, over death, over demons, over nature, over sin. But there's no lessons in here. I don't know your condition. I don't think I already made it. I'm working on it. There may be a storm in your heart. You know, we're pretty good at proving on good things. How are you doing? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. Well, I mean, how are you? That's a different question. We may not feel like we know more than reputation, but if there's a storm in your heart tonight, who could be calm? Someone calm this. I'm not saying you'll remove it. You may live with it. You may have to deal with it. But who's going to be on the other side of it? Lord, I'm going to be all the way. That's important to remember. Let's move on. Chapter 5. There are 3 verses here. We'll read them quickly. But in verse 10, there are 3 prayers or petitions that are made to Jesus, and he says, yes, yes, no. Yes, yes, no. You ever seen this? In verse 10, he besought him. That's the man who is demon-possessed. He's a violent man. In fact, they tried to chain him up, but he plucked off and broke it, and he got away. And he lives out in the cemetery. People avoid it. They don't want to do this guy. He's dangerous. Well, Jesus, this is the Galilee. He's crossed over the sea, Galilee, on the other side. They're going to ask him to leave. That's astonishing. They kicked Jesus out of their town. Wow. After he healed the guy. And that was the best thing that ever happened to him. But he kicked it out. Anyway, verse 10, the man that had all the demons decided that he would not send. Well, this is the demons first. The demons, when he commanded to exit the man, they're more and more legion. And they said, God, go send us back out of the country. The other account says, in the dead, in the deeds, I think that they'll send us back to hell. And who didn't want to go back there? They got a little reprieve for a little while. But Jesus says, okay. That's verse 13. Forthwith, Jesus gave them leave. In other words, permission. They went into the swine and pigs that went down out and drowned in the sea. Well, this is another lesson for a while. We used to allow that to happen, probably because it was supposed to be big farmers anyway. We just say that, that's an unclean animal. But jump down to the second one, and that's verse 17. And they began to pray him to depart out of their coast. That is, leave town. And Jesus says, yes, he gets back to the mountain. He's not going to force himself to do like money. We don't want it. He stands at the door and knocks, but he doesn't knock the door down. I got that by you. And then the third verse when he says no. And when the shepherd verse 18, he that possessed the devil prayed him. That is, the man he could just heal says, I want to go with you. I mean, he lived in Cincinnati, right? Did I go with you? I guess he had a house in town, but you want to go with Jesus? You met him, and he held you, and you talked to him. Well, he said, no. Yeah. You got to stay here. They won't let me preach you. You go next door. That's verse 19. Go on and tell your friends. That's what we're supposed to do. What did Jesus do for me? Something wonderful. I wish everybody knew Jesus in the lives. But I know. Let's move to chapter 6. Now I'm afraid to look at my watch. So chapter 6. Will was supposed to put it up there, but since he didn't, I'm going to. 6. There it goes. 6:44. 6:44. There was a lot of people who came out to hear Jesus preach. They got hungry. Jesus didn't want to send them away hungry because they were about to faint. And he says, what can we feed them? And the disciples, he said, well, find out how much food you got. And they came back and said, we got 5 pieces of bread and 2 fish. You know how many people are there? 5,000. He says, that's enough? Yeah. Let them sit down and I'll feed them. This is the reason I chose this. This is the only miracle that's subject to resurrection. That's in all 4 gospels. Only miracle. So it must be significant. So, verse 41, they set them down, and he divided it. They were all filled. Verse 42, multiplied the food, and everybody had as much as they wanted. And they had 12 baskets left over. I don't know what they do with it. Maybe the disciples figured it, around them and say, well, it's preaching. Maybe they took the poor people in town and went out. I don't know what they did, but they didn't waste it. 44, and they would eat the loaves for about 5,000 men. That shows Jesus' compassion, his practicality, and his power. He cared about people and he fed them. Now let's go to chapter 7. Chapter 7 are key verses 37. I mentioned earlier that one of Mark's key words, amazed or astonished. Let's read this. And we're beyond measure. This is when Jesus heals the deaf man. And the deaf, of course, you can't speak. So this man had 2 problems. One, the reason for the other. Jesus healed him. In verse 35, his ears were open and the spirit of his tongue was loose. He was able to speak plain languages. What a blessing that was. What a blessing. And he charged them not to tell anybody. It's interesting to read through here. Now, the one exception is when he said, go tell your friends. You saw. But at the other times, he said, don't tell people. Because he became so popular, people just hounded him. So he said to them, don't tell people, and that's what they did. And he told us to tell everybody, that's what we do. We don't tell anybody. That's backwards. So we need to, that's years ago. And we're beyond measure astonished. Jesus was amazing. They were astonished. I didn't read this, but when he stilled the storm, in Luke's account, he had done all things well. Some people are really good at one thing, like they play basketball and hunting and they do those sort of stuff. They're good at something. But Jesus was good at everything. And I read through this chapter this afternoon just to see what we're talking about. He was good at answering his enemies. He was good at, he healed the demon-possessed girl in Syrophoenician mother's daughter. Incidentally, she wasn't a Jew. She was a Gentile. She passed Jesus' test. He said, I don't think I can help you. I got to feed the children, the Jews, first. She picked up on that word first. She said, she was so humble. He said, why Jesus would help her. He said, that's not really. Maybe there's some scraps. to the dogs. She called her something else. What did anything left? Jesus said, because of this, say, home to dogs. So, you did everything well. Everything. There's no flaw in Jesus' character, in his words, in his action. No flaws. You can study it, I hope you will, the rest of his life or the rest of your life. And you'll never say, that's not there. Or, Jesus wouldn't be better either. There's no better. He's perfect. Everything about him is you couldn't write a fictional character to mean that he was the real deal. Chapter 8. Let's see chapter 8. This is halfway through the book. The key word is 29. This is where Jesus takes his disciples on a retreat that we call Caesarea Philippi. He asked them that question we mentioned this morning: who do men say that I am? Who do he say that I am? And Peter said, right, I'm God, Christ, verse 29. So they had, this is 2.5 years into their observing, 6 months before the crucifixion. And he says, okay, you've had enough time. What do you think? And let's let God know. Who else? Who said God? He began to teach them, Son of man, I said many things you rejected, I was killed, scarred, and so forth. 3 days I was dead. And Peter rebuked him, and remember we talked about this morning, he said, get behind me, Satan. They wondered about that. Why does this rising from the dead? They didn't really get it yet. But he's got 6 more months to teach. So that brings us to chapter 9, verse 1. And this is where he promises to build a kingdom. That's a significant teaching in the Old Testament and New Testament. Verse 1, he said to them, I said that there should be something that stand here, that is, they're alive right now, which shall not taste of death. They won't die until something happens. What? Until they have seen the kingdom of God come with power. Well, you can read in your Bible 50 pages, you'll come to Acts, the 2nd chapter, and that's where the kingdom comes with power. The Holy Spirit comes out, multiple times, like as a fire, out each of the apostles, and they spake with other tongues, and the gospel preached, and 3,000 people were baptized, and the church began. The kingdom started right there in Acts chapter 2. So, who were alive when Jesus preached this in Mark 9 were still alive. And they got to see the kingdom come. Now, there are a whole lot of people that don't know that yet. That's one of the things we need to teach. We think the kingdom is going to be set on earth and produce for 1,000 years sometime in the future. But what do you think the Lord's Supper is? The Lord's Supper is the kingdom. The kingdom's here. Revelation 1, 5, and 6. John said, I'm here representing in the kingdom. So Jesus said, either there's a really old people tomorrow, or the kingdom's here, because Jesus didn't lie about it. That's chapter 9. Verse 1, then verse 7 is another key verse. This is where God signs the birth certificate. There was a cloud that overshadowed them before his kingdom and said, this is my beloved son. Hear him. So there you have God acknowledging his son. Let's go to chapter 10. Chapter 10, our key verse is 21. Jesus, beholding him, loved him. I just love that, don't you? This is a young man that did not become a follower of Jesus. He had a lot of them all. He was rich, he had youth, he was a ruler, he had authority. We call him rich young ruler. We don't know his name, but he walked away sad. He met Jesus. Jesus invited him to be a follower of him. He said, no, I'm going to keep my trinkets. I'm going to keep my trinkets. Okay? Because Jesus said, do what you want to do. Do what you want. But he doesn't tell us that. But if it's got a hold of us, we've got to get rid of it. And that's what Jesus saw this one. Because he loved you and told him the truth. He said, I love you and I want you to be my follower in heaven. Do rid of that stuff that's blocking you. And Jesus is properly God invested in that. He's really like that. Question. Then the next one is chapter 11. Chapter 11 and verse 28. One of Mark's key words is authority. What? And saying unto him, by what authority? God, this guy. This is where Jesus goes to the temple in this chapter. And he flips over the money changer's table and runs out the seller, the ones who sell the sacrificial animals. Well, that was the priest's watch. They were making money go in the background, they were digging a lot of them. Jesus did it twice. He did it at the beginning of his ministry. Maybe have a lesson from this. We got so many things to talk about. Not a lot of talk about John 2. But this is the second time. Jesus did this at the beginning of his ministry, at the end of his ministry. This is the second time. And they're mad about it. They're like, who gave you the authority to turn over our money changing tables? Who gave you the authority to say we couldn't do that here? You're not. Who are you? We're the priests. What authority do you establish these things? So Jesus said, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. You answer my question, I'll answer yours. Baptism of John. From heaven? Well, we can start tomorrow.
No, keep going.
Keep going, you're good.
I'm looking for the bags. I thought I could do it. That's such an optimist, but I'm such a disappointing one. Seriously, we can do it tomorrow. I can't even finish in 7 minutes on this. So check out. We'll do it tomorrow. We'll do it tomorrow.
Go ahead. All right.
Let's do it. All right. You asked for it. Here we go. I said I never made that promise before. I'm not going to do it. All right. Verse 28. He gave you the authority to do this. He said, okay, you guys my question last week. And they said, well, if we say John was a prophet, he's going to say, why didn't you obey him? But if we say he wasn't a prophet, these people are going to be mad. Because they thought he was a prophet. So they say, we can't say. Jesus said, okay, I can't say you. And he walks away and never answers their question. That's the astonishing question. He never answered their question. Because they didn't have a sincere question. They were just trying to hurry. You don't have to answer those questions. That's what I want to know. There are people, and preachers learn this, I guess that was a lot of everybody does that. But there are people that ask questions that just don't talk about. That's all he's asking. But they don't deserve an answer. And we can't always judge others. So I try to err on the side of charity here. But if you can tell, people try to drag me in a box, Preachers, they got, you don't answer their questions. You're not sincere. You're sincere, actually, spend 3 days answering these questions. Anyway, that's not in Scripture. Chapter 12. Our key verse is 37. 12:37. Oh, I love this verse. 12:37. David therefore himself called the Lord. And which is he then his son? The last part. The common people heard him God. They never heard of each other. The Pharisees, the scribes, they're enemies. They're standoffish. They're judgmental. This man comes down here on our side of town. This man, he helps people. He helped one. He helped my uncle have a. Matthew 15:30 says he healed the lame. You don't name this stuff. If you heal a lame person, he's got a new leg. Can you imagine all this thing up? The astonishment at the next gathering, and here comes up a daddy, and he's walking, on the leg. His name is Jesus. This whole astonishing is. People love the common people heard about him. Jesus was a common man, a common job, a common name. We think that Jesus could, but Jesus was just a regular name. It was the same as Old Testament name, Joshua. A lot of people heard of Jesus. Even today, in Spanish culture, a lot of people heard of Jesus. I went through a preach a sermon one time on Jesus' emotions, he had common emotions. Jesus liked common people, and common people like him. Chapter 13. Verse 32. This is what we probably all know. This course was a preaching was not ours. This is the Tuesday report crucified on Friday. And it says, last time to be at the temple. He walks out of it. It says, this house should be desolate. Those Jews were like, that's like somebody stepping out of a lighthouse and said, this house is going to be abandoned. The lighthouse? Why is it there? Well, that's the way they talk about the temple. And Jesus says, it's going to be desolate. Well, that happened. It's burned down and tore apart, and they considered it. Anyway, then the disciples asked a question. One of the questions was about, when is this going to happen? And then they said, when's the end of the world going to happen? It's two different questions. Separated so far, 2,000 years. They didn't know that, but Jesus did. So he answered the question we were asked in verse 32. I drew a line, and if you draw a line, you probably wrong. Do this. Above verse 32. Everything above that line is talking about 87. Everything below that line is talking about the second coming of Jesus. Now, people get really confused about that. And they'll pull some apocalyptic language out of that first part of the chapter and try to apply it to the end times. And they get confused. It's not what we're talking about. That line will tell you. He answered the question. But verse 32. But of that day, this is the contrast word. But of that day, it's a different thing than you've been talking about. But of that day, that hour, knoweth no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, even the Son. Jesus was not omniscient when he was on earth. He knew a lot. John 2:25, but he was not omniscient. At least one thing he did not know. That's when he was coming back. Only my Father. He knows it. So that day is yet in the future right now. But everything that hasn't happened before Jesus returned has already happened. That was not always true. There were some prophecies in the New Testament that happened like in the next couple hundred years that have now occurred, but they haven't occurred until it happened. So Jesus could come at any time. I was preaching yesterday at West Church, and I want to talk about that a little bit. With that verse, follow my face circle around. Jesus is coming home. Oh, yes. Oh, no. Which one would it be for me? Well, I need to make a decision. I have to be, oh, yes, God, Lord, after this service. You should make a decision. It's on me. But look at chapter 14. Oh, I got 3 chapters to go. We want to pass. 14. This is a good chapter, but key verse is 62. 62. This is when Jesus has been arrested, kept up all night, he hasn't been eaten since the Last Supper. He's now before the judge, the high priest, in verse 60, 61. Jesus didn't say anything to it, the high priest asked him, art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Now remember, Jesus Christ was not first and last name. His name and title. Jesus is his name. Christ, Christos, anointed one. That's his title. That's who he was. The Pharisees believed he was Jesus. They did not believe he was Christ. That's the whole point. Yeah, he's Jesus of Nazareth. But he's not the Messiah. He's a forger. He's a poser. So they asked him that question, art thou the Christ? Now there are people, I've read this, you may read who say Jesus never claimed to be the Son of God while he was on earth, but after he died, his disciples loved him so much, they missed him so much, they invented this legend about him, that he was the Son of God, he did miracles, and he was a good man, and he had a lot of good teachings, but he's not resurrected, except in the minds of his followers. He didn't even want to be the Son of God. You know, people who make statements like that ought to read the Bible first. Because notice this, art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed, the Son of God? And Jesus said, what are those next 2 words for you all? Did Jesus ever come to be the Son of God? Yes. In John chapter 5, he claimed it over and over and over. There's 5 reasons there. It's a whole different sermon. That 5 reasons. 5 audacious claims of Jesus. I'm going to raise it. If Austin Johnson comes in, the next Austin meeting, He says, I got some special powers. Let's go sit there. I don't know he's dead. Would you go with him? Yeah. But they took Jesus seriously when he said, well, that's not, oh, just stop. Stop. He said, I'm going to be the judge of every human being. I'm going to be the judge. They took him seriously. Somebody says the 5 days a day is putting me on India. You know, that guy's not right. But they took Jesus seriously because he's back from life. All right, this is chapter 15. Chapter 15, 46. Let's do 37 and 46. Have you written, do you write, if you read the Bible, have you written DVR, that's what we've done, Death, Burial, and Resurrection, the 3 fundamental acts of the gospel? You might want to do that. So in Mark, the D goes outside verse 37. And Jesus cried with a loud voice and gave up the ghost. He died. So I wrote D beside that. Now, some people have trouble with the R. Resurrection. I think I'm going to have more trouble with the D. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and life. I can lie. That's it, I got. Because he took all our nation. He was of the city there. He was man. And he died. Life died. The Son of God died. The only perfect life ever in on that tree, on the cross. He breathed his last. And his Father looked in. Inside of him was he was not cognizant. He didn't pass out. He died. A lot of people say that. Oh, he just passed out on the cross. And then he woke up in the tomb. He swooned. And read that part about the Spirit. Because Jesus died after 6 hours. Normally you last longer than that. But they came out to break the legs so they can die sooner. Because you got to push up to get the air out. And you'll die. You'll suffocate if you keep on the legs. So they're going to break the broken oaths on like this for a while. I don't know how long it is. They're going to break his legs. But the Old Testament said a bone shall not be broken. That's pretty close to violating the scripture. Guess what? The bones are broken. Because they noticed. It's already there. And these are executioners. This is what they did for a living. If they didn't execute, then they got executed. That was the rule. If you don't carry out your responsibility, then you have to take on the penalty that you can do. That's why the Philippian jailer was going to fall on the sword. So I'm subject to trouble. Because he had prisoners in God. Anyway, so Jesus died. And then, verse 46, you can write reads on that. And he brought us, Joseph finally and took him down, and wrapped him in the linen, laid it in the sepulchre, which was hewn out of a rock. Now, nobody else had ever been in there, which is sort of unusual for Jewish graves because you had a lot of spaces in there. Like great grandma, great grandmother, the family burial plot. But this is new. He hewed it out. Nobody's died there. So we don't have any doubt who came out of it. It's only one man that went in it. You know, you can borrow some things. You can borrow my law. It's a mix of you need to borrow some money? It's not right here. Anybody ever borrow a grave? You don't borrow graves, except Jesus did. He doesn't want to borrow a grave. All the meat 3 days. And we figured out that was in there for hours. His body did not decompose. So I guess it's 16. Put your R beside verse 6. This is the angels speaking. Be not afraid, ye seek Jesus of Nazareth, which was crucified. Then underline the next two words. He is risen. That's good news. That's good news. If those two words that we're doing in the Bible, just very Bible. That's the foundation. That's the rock. That's our faith. If the resurrection's not true, if we don't have the help. We're all in those visible. But because Jesus came out, we know we can. Because he beat the devil, we know through him we beat the devil. It's wonderful that Jesus is raised. And then he pointed a nail-scarred hand. Still had a scar. Still had a hole. He healed other parts. They didn't heal us on the parts. Is that him or not? Anybody got a hole in your hand? Or in your side? He still did. It's him. But he took that nail-scarred hand and pointed at the Lord and just died for it. And he said, help. Help. The good news. That's what we're gospel news. That's what it is. Jesus is living. And you follow the sermons of the book of Acts. You know what the thing of the bigger sermon is? Not the crucifixion. The resurrection. Have you ever reenacted that in your life? Romans 6 says that before a person can become a follower of Jesus, they have to do what Jesus did. Not literally, but die, be buried, and resurrected. That's what a baptism is. We die to sin. That's repentance. We're buried in water. We're resurrected to new life, just like Jesus. That's the form of doctrine. I don't know where you are in your faith journey about that. But if you need to be baptized, Jesus said, go to the world, preach the gospel, and preach. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. That's good news. So, there's three facts there, right? He that believeth is baptized shall be saved. If you don't have this one, you don't have this one. If you don't have this one, you don't have this one. But if you have this one and this one, you have this one. That's not what the preacher says. That's what the Bible says. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. So where are you? You say, well, I was baptized as a baby. Remember? You don't have that one. You don't have that one. The baby's little. You say, well, I confess that Jesus is the Son of God when I was 12 years old. Remember? You don't have that one. You don't have that one. Believe, be baptized. Watch what he says. So, where are you? Are you a believer that you're here? Have you ever been baptized for mission? You said you need to do that. Don't leave planet Earth without that. Acts 2:38. You believe you're not a saved person. You don't have nobody to die. I don't care how much you need to die. God gives. He gives. That's the message. You haven't been faithful. I'm sorry. For free. There's power in that prayer. That's awesome. Come on,
All to Jesus I